Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelsen, professional horse trainer, and with me is my good friend, Deb Romero, certified Alexander Technique instructor. And there's more to it, but those are the simplest titles. So today's topic is about lateral work or lateral movements. So lateral work is a specific type of training technique or training exercises that involve movements like shoulder fore, shoulder in, half pass, pirouette, leg yields. So it's a more like intermediate to advanced level of training that is classically taught as a way to strengthen and gymnasticize our horses to make them more athletic. So today we're going to talk a little bit about lateral work and how that relates to what we've been talking about with lateral bending coupled with the spinal function of rotation and how it affects flexion and extension or the up and down forces of the spine. So we're going to geek out a little on lateral work today. So I think the first thing is to just quickly review or define the difference between correct lateral bending in our horse's body versus incorrect lateral bending in our horse's body, because that is still a widely debated topic in the horse world. So you want to start with that, Deb, or you want me to?
Okay. You go ahead.
I mean,
I just get the vision in my head. I just saw a question on Facebook about somebody posted, and it goes back to our last podcast, a picture of a horse bending on a circle, and the person asking, is this the right way?
You mean the midline bending on the circle?
Yeah, the midline bending. And I was like, oh, no. And luckily, the information's getting out there, because 3 out of the 4 people that responded said, no, that's not the correct way.
Oh, that's so good to hear.
I know. I was like, yay, people are getting it.
Yeah.
So it's good to see that. It's good to see that information is being acknowledged.
Yeah, because mechanically, if we look for a line of force that feels like a banana or a curve through our horse's midline, we're creating dysfunction of the spine. Yes. But that idea is still widely perpetuated in training, widely sort of like a known, so to speak, in horse training books, with horse training, with, in all kinds of venues. That's still a pretty prevalent idea.
Yeah. And I just popped up in my head. I think it was drilled into my head when I was in riding a pony club dressage test, right into that corner and bend.
Right. Bend the horse around your inside leg.
Yeah, yes. that one keeps popping up in my head.
Yes. Yeah. And that we're looking for the whole rib cage to shift. We're looking to see the nose, the eye, the head of the horse to the inside. We're looking for a visible bend through the neck. We're trying to feel the shape of the midline on the same curve of the turn or the circle. And all of those ideas are creating significant dysfunction through our horse's spine.
Yes.
So that, in a nutshell, all of those things I just said describe incorrect lateral bending.
Very good.
And on a technical level, what it means is if the lateral flexion or lateral bending of the spine exceeds the stability of the rotation, then we have incorrect lateral bending. So correct lateral bending is defined as with the dorsal tips of the spine, the long spinous processes, we're reducing the twisting function. We're stabilizing the twisting function of the spine. So the dorsal tips of the spine remain upright, stable, and centered while the spine is bending laterally. So only the pole Like that is what defines correct lateral bending on a mechanical level through the horse's spine.
So I'm seeing it, the difference, when you said that, the difference I see is if we go back, and I call it the banana theory of bending the horse, what's happening there is, and it happens with people too, if you don't have correct spinal function, it affects the kinematics of the legs.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
in incorrect lateral bending, the kinematics of the legs are not adduction and abduction.
Well, there's still abduction and abduction, but it's the wrong direction.
The wrong direction.
Wrong
Yeah.
direction of the legs. So in other words, like we talked about with straight on a circle, if the pole is straight and the midline feels broomstick straight and stable, and we're on tracking a circle, then the way the horse tracks, say, on a left circle, is the left hind leg, the inside hind leg, is going to adduct towards the midline, and the right hind leg or the outside hind leg is going to abduct away from the midline. And the front legs are going to do the opposite. So the left front leg is going to abduct away from the midline in the direction of travel. And the outside front leg or the right front leg is going to adduct towards the midline. So if we have incorrect lateral bending, we're going to destabilize the rotation. So the barrel is now going to roll too far to the inside or too far to the outside.
Right.
That's unique to the horse. So there's no telling which way it's going to go. But either way, as soon as the barrel loses the uprightness related to rotation, then the inside front leg, instead of reaching away from the midline in the direction of travel, is almost always going to go towards the midline.
Yeah, and I've actually seen it. I've actually on one of my horses seen it go not only towards the midline, but backwards.
Yes. So instead of going forward and away from the midline, it goes towards the midline and backwards. Yeah. That's a horse that's on the forehand with excessive lateral bending.
Yeah.
Right. Or incorrect lateral bending. So as soon as, like we talked about in the paper, the theoretical ideal is that with correct lateral bending, the dorsal tips of the spine are going to spiral in the same direction as the lateral bend, but they stay upright. They don't tilt. I think
that's really important.
Yeah, they don't tilt in the same direction as a lateral bend. That's excessive. And they don't tilt away from the direction of lateral bend. That's inverted rotation. But they remain upright, and the whole spine, as it laterally bends, the dorsal tips spiral gently in the same direction.
What would that, can we come up with like a description?
I think I showed it last time, and I did get a comment that it was helpful when I sort of showed it with my hand. That if you cup the palm of your hand, you're laterally bending the palm of your hand, your fingertips just naturally go the same direction.
Okay.
So that's like the phalanges sort of following the bones of the wrist and the hand, right? So if we do it too far, we actually close our hand. But if we just sort of gently cup our hand, our fingertips sort of go the same direction as the inside of the bend.
Okay.
Right? So inverted rotation would be trying to cup our palm and put our fingertips the opposite way. It's almost impossible. Right? Or we could cup our hand and put our fingers too far in the same direction. Right? So either way, if we think of the bones of the spine, we have the vertebral bodies, and then we have the long, bony spinous processes, which are the dorsal wings of the vertebra. So as the the vertebral bodies, when they flex laterally, the vertebral bones are coming closer together, say on a left lateral bend, the left side of the vertebra are coming closer together and the right side of the vertebra are coming farther apart. but that's also going to affect the top portion of the vertebral bones to rotate left, stay upright, or rotate the opposite direction.
Right.
So that's why it's always coupled. It's the same bone. We're just looking at
Right.
it from two different angles, right? So if we excessively bend laterally, which is a flexion laterally, extension on the outside, flexion on the inside, then we're going to destabilize the uprightness of the dorsal side of the bones.
And wasn't it in the paper that it's like between T9 and T14 that the horse can have the most rotation
And lateral bending.
and lateral bend? So that's like right where we sit, right?
It's right between our seat bones and thighs, that area. And
Okay.
so that's where correct lateral bending only occurs there. That's where, if we have correct lateral bending, that's the most mobile area of the spine for lateral bending.
Okay.
So there's some truth in that the horse softens around the inside leg, but they don't move away from the inside leg.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out in my head a way to share what that feels like in our bodies when we're riding.
So as a rider, if we have incorrect lateral bending, we're going to see a bend through the neck visually.
Okay.
We're going to, especially if we're searching for a bend through the
Yes.
thorax, we're going to
Yes.
feel the rib cage shift
Right.
to the outside of the bend. Or if we think our horse is resisting lateral bend, they push towards our inside leg, but that could be inverted rotation.
Right.
Right. So if the whole rib cage between our lower legs is making a big adjustment, increasing pressure against our inside calf or increasing pressure against our outside calf, we probably have too much lateral bending. Right. So if we feel that line of force like a banana, if we can see the neck bending, and the real telltale sign is our saddle shifting left or right.
I love that.
That's related to rotation.
Yeah.
So
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
the
under
saddle
our
shift and putting us to one side or the other, to me, is clear.
Yes. So rotation, rotation is a function that can only be corrected through how the rider uses their body weight and how we stabilize our seat bones. There's no maneuver that actually corrects rotation.
Right.
So when we increase lateral bending, if we exceed the stability of the rotation, we're going to feel either the saddle shifts left or right, or the force of the horse's back lifts us up on one side of our pelvis and drops us on the other.
Yeah.
So a lot of people just end up bending through the rib cage, keeping their head straight, and they think I'm fine. Right. But it's the one leg shorter, one seat bone higher, saddle going off to one side. All of that tells us we've destabilized rotation with too much lateral bending.
Right. Right.
So that's how we know we have incorrect lateral bending.
That disconnect of what you just mentioned at the waist, and helping riders to learn that our pelvis as riders goes with our spine. It doesn't go with our legs.
Yeah.
Is important for them to start feeling what's actually going on underneath them, because that's a huge disconnect in riders that I see.
Well, and one of the primary causes of that disconnect, I think you said the number one cause is we think of our seat connected to our legs rather than our upper body.
Exactly.
Right. So if we connect our pelvis to our head, the secondary issue, the problem we create in our own bodies all the time that shuts off what we can feel through our pelvis, is that we turn our head to look where we're going. So as soon as we twist our head too far left and right, we can't feel the horse pushing up on one side of our body versus the other because our head is already on a new path of travel.
Right.
And our body's
And
lagging behind.
usually our thinking is on a new path of travel too. It's not in the present. We're trying to get to letter A at the trot or something. Yeah.
Right. Right. Or jump riders. I was trained, look where you're going, turn your head, and that turns your seat bones. And I go, well, not necessarily,
Good point.
because our neck and thoracic, just like the horse, is a far more mobile part of our spine compared to our lumbar and pelvis.
Yep.
So we can twist our head way farther than we can twist our lumbar and pelvis.
Yes.
So, and I don't know if you have an explanation, but there is a literal cutoff. When I see a rider turning their head to look where they're going, past the horse's head. So, in other words, the rider's looking left and the horse's head is off to their right. So the rider is turning their head. There's a literal cutoff. People literally don't feel the seat when we do that.
I used to say that a lot when I was a massage therapist. We'd get together as massage therapists and talk, which wasn't very often. But this disconnect between the head and the body, and I really think it's a brain thing, that we're already, like I mentioned, we're already on the next task in our brain.
So we're not feeling what the horse
So
is
we are
doing
not
in the
present
moment.
with what's going on underneath us.
Yeah.
We're already on to the next thing. And
Yeah.
that's a total disconnect.
Yeah. And it could just be a mental thing that we're a little bit out in the future of where our horse is actually tracking.
Yeah.
So we just disconnect, because that's how you see riders who get ahead of the horse's movement, behind the horse's movement, way out ahead of the turn. And that's why if a horse refuses the jump, the rider takes the jump, because we were ahead of the motion.
I've got a picture of me doing that.
Yeah. So when we're trying to feel correct lateral bending coupled with stabilized rotation that is upright, we do have to stay very present through our seat and low back to feel if our horse is doing it correctly or incorrectly. As soon as we feel one seat bone drop and the other seat bone lift, we've destabilized the rotation because of too much lateral bending.
Yes.
So that helps us meter and monitor how much lateral bending we can ask for before we hit the point of destabilizing the rotation. And that's the essential difference between correct lateral bending and incorrect lateral bending, is how is it affecting the rotation function?
Yes.
Right. So then now we know what it feels like incorrect, which we probably have all experienced, because correct lateral bending with stable rotation, which includes stable rotation, is difficult. It's difficult for the horse to achieve. And the side effect of correct lateral bending, which is stable rotation, will also affect and increase the upward flexion of the whole spine.
Yes.
So if the horse has a hard time lifting their back, they're also going to have a very hard time with correct lateral bending.
Yeah, that's a big struggle. I think I've mentioned before, my big mare had a stuck in a left lateral rotation in the thoracics. So for her to do any lateral work to the right
was disastrous.
Yeah. And she would just struggle and struggle. Luckily, we're at a point now where I'm starting to notice maybe every third step I ask, she actually picks up her right leg and moves it away from her body. Not very far. I mean, this is not huge by any means. It's maybe 1 or 2 inches. And I'm like, it's coming. It's there.
And that's why, like we talked about, straight on a circle with the pole straight, reducing all lateral bending as a way to help stabilize rotation. Straight on a circle is going to work those oblique muscle groups between the legs. So as long as the legs are going the wrong way, your lateral movements, shoulder in, shoulder fore, half pass, pirouette, are all going to be challenging. And you're most likely going to have incorrect lateral bending in those maneuvers than correct.
And I've also seen some horses still in extension when they're being asked for a lateral move.
Right. Which is going to destabilize rotation quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yes. So if the back goes downward in longitudinal extension, it has the side effect of hyperrotation,
Yeah.
which is also going to be little tiny hyperlateral bends through the spine. So you get a wiggly midline, or you get a horse that rocks the saddle side to side. It's the same problem, but some horses with a lot of muscle will tighten the muscles, so you get a rocking effect through the whole thorax, through the rib cage, through the saddle, is like a rocking effect. A horse with more sinewy musculature or weaker muscles is not going to rock as much as the midline feels wiggly.
Okay.
But it's the same problem. It's little tiny excessive rapid lateral bends. It's hyper rotation where the dorsal tips of the spine are sort of rocking back and forth. And that is the side effect of the spine pushing down.
Yes.
So as long as the spine is pushing down, you're nowhere near correct lateral bending. You can guarantee you're going to have incorrect lateral bending on a
So that should
mechanical
always
level.
be the first thing we address is extension.
Yeah. And ironically, you get horses out of extension by creating internal straightness and stability. So
Right.
again, we come back to straight on a circle as a fantastic tool for
everything.
reducing the wiggle or reducing the rock until the legs can start to track in the appropriate directions. So straight on a circle is a way, when you stabilize hyperrotation, we resist it with our aids. And when we reduce all lateral bending by resisting that through our leg and rein aids, then they come out of the downward force of extension because we created straightness.
Yeah. And I think that's real important what you said about, we talked about the rider being ahead of the horse or behind the horse, because if you are not present in that moment, you're going to miss it.
You're not going to feel it. And people will often say to me, I just don't feel, I don't feel my horse. Like when people talk about, can you tell me where each foot is landing, or what is the back doing? And they're like, I don't know. Where are the hindquarters? I don't know. I can't feel anything. And I go, well, you feel something, because as soon as we get on a horse, we're going to feel something. So understanding the spinal functions and the forces that are related to it helps us decipher what we're feeling.
Yes.
It's a language, right? It's a
language.
non-verbal language back and forth between us and our horse that is, each spinal function generates specific directions of force. It affects the body in specific ways. So if we're increasing lateral bending, but we have no idea that rotation is even a function or how it affects the feel of what we feel in the saddle, we're going to carry on with our lateral work, probably promoting more dysfunction than we are balance or correct function.
Yeah, I'm getting that vision in my head of, if people don't know what rotation is, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way it first rang in my head is I was riding one of my horses down a hill. And they just sloshed me
side to side.
And I went, oh, that's rotation.
Yes.
But when you're on the level ground, it's still there. It's just much smaller.
Or a lot of times what I'll do, there's two strategies to understand the feeling we feel as riders related to destabilizing rotation. So one is, I can put the riders in the saddle being receptive, not directing, and this can be done at halt. So you're just sitting there at halt, feeling what you're feeling. And then you can have a helper, or a lot of times I'll go and apply pressure to the bones of the withers in front of the saddle. So if I apply pressure to, say, if I'm standing on the horse's left side, I might push the wither bones to the right. As soon as I push the wither bones to the right and apply pressure, I can hold them there, and the rider will start to notice, oh, my right seat bone is dropping and my left seat bone is coming up and being lifted. My
I think
pelvis
that's
is
a
now on
great way
level.
to do it. Yeah.
And then as soon as I pull the bones back to the left, the opposite occurs. Then the rider's left seat bone is going to drop and the right seat bone is going to be pushed up. So if you have a helper, it's a good way to feel it just by having somebody apply pressure left to right on the wither bones. You absolutely feel rotation. And the way to do it by ourselves is sitting at halt. We shorten one rein and increase the lateral bend of the neck more and more slowly until we're kind of bending our horse's neck side to side, but one side at a time slowly. And as you sort of bend the neck with the nose to the right, you'll feel the right seat bone have upward force and the left seat bone drop.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good place to start.
And vice versa, the other direction. If you slowly bend your horse's neck to the left, you'll start to feel more and more and more upward force on the left seat bone and a dropping or an absence of horse on your right seat bone. That's inverted rotation. That's the rotation going opposite of the bend. So we can create inverted rotation at a certain degree of lateral bending, the horse's spine. And I think the reason this happens is because if our concept of how the horse's spine bends laterally is wrong, rotation is a function that prevents us from snapping our horse's spinal cord. It's like you're going to create an opposing twist the more you bend the spine laterally, because otherwise we would exceed the mobility of the spine and it could damage the spinal cord. So it's a protective mechanism that the horse can bend laterally by twisting in the opposite direction and still maintain integrity of the central nervous system.
And I think that to relate to that, in that paper that they mentioned about kissing spine, where they said lateral flexion contributes to the problem by transverse process displacement, especially if the horse is already in extension.
Right.
So incorrect lateral flexion and extension for a horse with kissing spine is
massively painful, and you may get bucked off. Yeah. You may get a big pain reaction, right? So as soon as I like to start, because it's a precursor. Basically, if the horse is in extension, like we talked about with hyperrotation and hyperlateral bending, like we've talked about in previous podcasts, you have massive instability through the axial skeleton.
And then it affects the legs, and then it goes to usually a lameness issue because.
Or the horse has to over tighten every muscle in the body because the bones of the axial skeleton are no longer stable like they should be.
And
so the muscles kick in.
And people do the same thing. It's that vision of somebody with a walker, that whole destabilization of the spine, and the arms and the legs are tensing and trying to balance, and that's not the place to balance from.
Right. Or just stability is a absolute requirement of the body. Yes. And so as soon as the axial skeleton is destabilized, the muscles kick in for stability. So on a young horse or a young person, it just manifests as muscle soreness, muscle tightness, right? Discomfort. But on an older person or an older horse, it's like it can become a serious stability issue.
Yes.
A serious where older people need the outside support, or an older horse is now going to manifest lameness or maybe behavioral problems because they feel so unstable.
Yep.
Right. When the body's young, you can kind of cope with it muscularly better than when the body's weak or older. So just because the horse is muscularly compensating doesn't mean that we have balance or we have correct function of the spine.
Is it true? I've seen one of those pictures of how bones develop and mature in the horse. Isn't it like 6 years for the spine?
7 years.
7 years for a
Yeah,
horse spine to become completely developed.
right. So
That's incredible.
it's sort of like we all know we can't sit on a baby horse until the knees close, right? So we
Mm,
have growth plates between every joint. While the bones are growing, there's growth plates between every joint in the body, right? So on human babies, it's that soft spot on the head, right? And then the growth plates start to sort of solidify from the head to the feet, I think, in humans, or through, from the head down the spine.
right.
For horses, it's the opposite. The growth plates, and it makes sense because they're prey animals who survive through movement. So the growth plates on a horse begin sort of solidifying or stabilizing from the feet up to the spine. So in other words, by the time the carpus or the front knees, what we call the knees of the horse, feel solid enough, that's when we say at 2 or 3 years old, they can start bearing weight. And they can, nothing wrong with that. But we also have to know that there's still a lot of instability. The growth plates haven't sort of solidified through the spine of the horse until 7 years old.
That's incredible.
So they can have, and that's where they're going to develop lifetime habits of dysfunction, because the body will find a way to stabilize even at the expense of correct function. Stability has to be achieved, right? Or we would fall over. So with this highly mobile spine on a young horse and the growth plates not really fully sort of where they're going to be because the bones are still growing and in flux, where we sit over the spine of the horse, we can either begin right away to encourage correct function, or we can create lifelong habits of dysfunction with how
And
we work with
yeah,
baby horses.
that's maybe why we're seeing, horses between the ages of 10 and 14, which I used to consider
Mm,
prime lifetime,
is now retirement age.
is now retirement. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of young horses are started because it's a financial advantage to get that horse trained sooner than later. They're expensive to keep, costs a lot of money for the breeding, and we only make your money back either in performance or sales, right?
Right.
So, but if it's our personal horse, like when I spend a lot of time in Europe, a 5 or 6 year old horse is still thought of as a baby. It's a
Interesting.
different mentality than what we see in the US. We only consider a 2 year old a baby, and by 5, they should be a mature horse. But more classical training and in Europe, a 5, 6, 7 year old horse is still considered to be in baby training, is a young horse, is still in development. So the expectations of training are much different.
Yep.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So we kind of diverged off of the lateral work, but knowing the difference between correct lateral bending and incorrect lateral bending is a huge issue. So incorrect lateral bending can lead to extension, can
Right.
create rotation issues, which can create muscle soreness, asymmetrical development, asymmetrical leg movement, incorrect leg kinematics, all kinds of issues, right? And correct lateral bending can increase flexion, change the leg kinematics into the correct movement, and can restore suppleness or correct muscle use throughout the
Yes.
entire body. So it's kind of a constructive or destructive
Oh,
process depending on our concept of lateral bending.
good
That's what's
point.
so important.
Yeah.
And if
And
we come into lateral work, talking about lateral maneuvers or lateral movements, right? That's where the strongest belief is if my horse can achieve a shoulder fore, then I've improved the balance. Or if my horse can do a half pass, then the horse is finding a higher level of balance as a result. So achieving the maneuver becomes the means to correct function. And there's a huge problem with that.
And it's the same thing in the human body as thinking that the activity is helping when we really should be thinking about balancing the body first and then add the activity.
Right. So we have the
It's
human
opposite.
era, we have the human era of jogging and running,
Yep.
right? With lots of blown out knees and shin splints and heel spurs, because the running or jogging itself
Mhm.
doesn't address at all the coordination of the spine, the use of the skeleton, what we call balance or imbalance, correct function or incorrect function. And the same with, I don't know, maybe aerobics or weightlifting, even
Right.
swimming. It's like if we go out and do athletic performance, but we don't address balance or function, our functionality of the spine and the axial skeleton, we damage ourselves. We do it all the time.
And that's what Alexander used to say. A lot of the master Alexander teachers say the Alexander technique can even help a criminal be a better criminal. You just use yourself better. No matter what you do, you're going to do whatever you need to do better instead of doing the task, getting hurt, and then trying to fix it.
Right. And that's the importance of understanding correct function of the spine in our horses, because as soon as they're carrying our asses around, it's a higher athletic demand than if they're not carrying a rider or not being driven and pulling a cart or working. Even lunging, going around in circles, is challenging to the horse's natural ability to balance and have correct function. So all of the things we ask our horse to do are athletic endeavors. So if we do it with dysfunctional or instability, dysfunctional use of the spine, excessive lateral bending, destabilizing rotation, or even extension, then all of our efforts are actually perpetuating, if not creating, more dysfunction in our horse. Less athletic ability. And that's what sort of drew us to each other, is the horse training I do is very much like the Alexander technique work that you do with people. It's the same principle I operate off of with training horses. Yeah. So if we come to lateral work, just achieving the maneuver to me indicates nothing about correct movement. So you can have high levels of performance with very dysfunctional use of the body. So the side effects of doing it that way are behavioral issues, lameness issues, or just resistance from our horses, having our horse fight us all the time to do the work.
Or if
right?
it's, I've heard that kind of language. Oh, they're lazy. Oh, they're this. So, and I don't think either one of us see it that way at all.
Right.
The horse is always telling us, giving us information, not trying to rebel against us.
Right. And our human perspective thinks, I just need more leverage. As soon as I get the horse to do this, it'll be good. And from the horse's perspective, they're probably thinking, you're not getting the point. Like you're missing.
What are you thinking?
What are you thinking? Like you're making me
what
more and more
problem?
and more uncomfortable. And I'm trying to tell you this and you're not listening.
Yeah, exactly.
I know. I always have to wonder what our horses think of us.
Well, and I talked with you about this last week. I was on a great track with my horses. And then I got on 2 of the 3 of them the same day, and neither one of them were listening. And I went, well, I had a choice there. I could try to tell them to get with the program, right? But what I did was I questioned me. It's like, what do I need to change to get their attention?
Yeah. Or I
So
take
what,
it as a sign of, what am I missing?
what am I missing?
What am I
What are they
missing
telling
here?
me? What am I missing? So I
Mhm.
changed it up and they're back to being happy campers.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And it's even the same, like with lateral work, a lot of the definition of lateral work is how many degrees the front end moves, right? Or it's related to, like, people think, okay, if my horse's nose is to the
Oh, that.
left and I'm tracking a left diagonal line, then voila, I'm in half pass.
Yep.
Right. And I go, no, you can have the nose to the left, tracking a perfect diagonal line, walk, trot, or canter on a half pass, and your horse's barrel is rolling to the right.
And dipped down
Or dip down in
the back
extension
in
and just
extension.
shaking left and right.
Yep.
Right. So just tracking the line with the nose in that direction, you can pull off the maneuver of a half
Right.
pass. But the real purpose in classical training is that half pass meant correct lateral bend on a diagonal path of travel as a way
Yes.
to gymnasticize forward, like locomotory muscles, oblique muscles, stabilizing muscles. So it gymnasticizes the horse and makes them much stronger if we have correct lateral bend on a diagonal path of travel,
Yes.
right? That is the point of a half pass. So if we look at, say, shoulder fore and shoulder in, we're asking for correct lateral bending, stable rotation on a straight path of travel. So internally, the horse is bending laterally, but the external path of travel is straight. So
And
again, we're working
yep.
the oblique muscle group with the braking and pushing muscle groups, which does gymnasticize the horse. But what it's become is people want to see the shoulders 30 degrees off track,
Yeah.
or 3 tracks from the hooves.
I've
And
heard
that
that one.
and that defines the shoulder in. And I go, no, you can have 3 tracks. You can have a bend through the neck. You can be on a straight line of, or a straight path of travel with a banana down your horse's midline.
Yep.
And you can still have the whole barrel of the horse rolling to the inside or rolling to the outside rather than being upright. And so just doing that maneuver and looking at the leg placement can be, you can think you're achieving a shoulder in while you have incorrect lateral bend.
Yes.
And the point of shoulder in is same with shoulder fore. We can think of shoulder fore as a minimal degree of correct lateral bend. We can think on a straight path of travel. We can think of shoulder in as slightly more degree of lateral bend with correct rotation on a straight path of travel. We can think of half pass as even more lateral bend. So you're slowly maximizing the degree of lateral bend, which, like you pointed out, is really only between T9 and T14.
Right.
Just under our seat is where most of the lateral bending can occur, right? So if the neck is overbent, you actually decrease lateral bending through the thoracic.
Yes, because it just like in a human, and we've talked about, there's going to be some sort of tensional contraction if the spine is not being used properly. Something is going to tense.
Right. So if we feel correct lateral bend, the way I simplified it in my mind is shoulder fore is a little bit on a straight path of travel. Shoulder in is a little more on a straight path of travel. Half pass is a little more again on a diagonal path of travel. And then a pirouette is kind of the same degree as a half pass. So we're not going into more lateral bend, but it's probably half pass and pirouette are at maximum amount of potential lateral bend.
I like
But
that. Yeah.
Half pass is on a diagonal path of travel, and a pirouette is on a circular path of travel. So we can do large pirouettes, small pirouettes. We can do walking, trotting, canter pirouettes. None of that matters, right? But it's the internal lateral bend with stable rotation. And so what do we feel when the lateral bend is correct? What we actually feel is more stability, not more
Yeah.
bend.
I was trying to think of what it feels like, and we've talked about this before, the throughness, you feel it like this straight line. It feels like a straight line to me.
Yeah. So you can
Underneath.
see the pole is flexed to the left or the right. We might feel a little bit of softening around our inside calf, but it's not much. It's the
No.
difference of a few ounces of pressure.
Mhm.
It's not a lot. But what we will feel is we still have a broomstick straight line of force through
That's
the
what I
lower
feel.
neck and the back,
Mhm.
and we feel increased flexion. We feel more lift.
Yeah.
We feel the back widening and the whole horse becoming sort of taller sensation.
Yes.
And that's how we feel correct lateral bend. We don't feel a bend, we feel a straight upward lift.
Force. It's a straight upward force. I like
Or
that.
the throughness, like you said. It can be
Yeah.
a way to let the energy from the hindquarters go through the whole horse. So we're not
Yes.
fighting for forward, and we're not fighting to slow the horse down.
Exactly. It's the calm water place.
Yeah. So instead of looking at leg placement in lateral work, it's more how we feel the midline and the lifting sensation of the horse that tells us we have correct lateral bend or incorrect lateral bend. So if we go from our exercise straight on a circle, a lot of ways I'll teach people to feel how the horse responds to the request for lateral bending is once we're straight on a circle, if we shorten the inside rein and place the pole in the direction of travel, just a little tiny bit, but the rest of the neck is straight. It's literally just the pole.
At the
flexing.
pole. People have to remember it needs to be the pole, not C2, C3.
Right. Because as soon as like the neck bones act like one unit. If we try to flex the pole or the upper part of the spine too far to the left, it literally shifts the base of the neck bones to the right shoulder. So we create a shoulder issue, dropped shoulder, bulging shoulder, escaping through the shoulder because we overly bent the pole. So it's a delicate thing. I shorten my rein a couple of inches, and that's all I need. I shorten the inside rein a couple of inches, but I need my outside rein to make sure the lower neck doesn't lose alignment with the upper back and doesn't shift the shoulders left or right. So once I have that on a circle, technically I'm on a large, simple pirouette, right? Technically, if I have lateral bending on any circle, correct lateral bending, I'm on the movement called pirouette. And that isn't reserved for upper level riding, right? A canter pirouette on less than a 6-meter circle is an upper level move. But a pirouette itself is just defined by correct lateral bending on a circular path. So, or on a straight line with the pole straight, with the horse's midline straight, if we just shorten the inside rein a couple of inches, placing the pole to the inside of our straight line, we're asking the entire spine with that placement of the pole to find correct lateral bending. Right? So if that's not easy for the horse, we're going to feel a rotation issue. We're going to feel the barrel rolling and becoming unstable left to right. So we can let the pole go straight, stabilize the rotation, and then try it again.
That's my life.
Yes. And it's difficult for the horses. Lateral work is difficult for the horses because it's also going to increase flexion, longitudinal flexion, or the upward force of the back. So correct lateral bending is going to help the horse lift the back. But if lifting the back is difficult, then when we ask for correct lateral bending, they're going to resort into a dysfunction,
Yes.
extension or a rotation issue. And no amount of forcing them into a lateral bend is going to help the problem.
No. Exactly.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I work with lateral movements, is a little bit at a time. Once I've stabilized the midline, and especially if I can have a broomstick straight midline and levelness across the barrel on a turn or a circle, then I know the horse's oblique muscle groups are strong enough
working.
that I could probably try correct lateral bending.
That's a good point.
Yeah. But instead of looking at tracks or leg placement, it's like the horse can track and place the legs where we want them with completely incorrect lateral bending happening through the spine.
I agree.
And one of my mentors just eliminated all lateral work completely and brought horses to a very high level of balance with less fuss by just eliminating lateral bending. Because she only ever saw dysfunctional lateral work and saw how damaging it can be to a horse's use or coordination. So she just eliminated it entirely from her program. Said there's no need for it.
Wow.
And she was right. But I also worked with another mentor that starts with correct lateral bending at a very early stage of training. And it's difficult, but he wasn't incorrect either. So
Right.
I've worked with two very different theories with mentors, and both of them work. So I have options.
Yay.
I have options. I love having options because you never know how the horse is going to respond.
Nope.
Yeah. And I think the only other thing to address is leg yield. Like, what do you know about leg yield? Because that's considered the first phase of lateral work for most people. And it's as prevalent as bend your horse's midline into a banana on a circle. So
yeah, maybe that's a podcast in itself.
yeah. So the definition of a leg yield is a bend to the left while tracking forward to the right. So you're bending opposite the direction of travel. And just that thought.
Yeah, see,
it goes against the mechanics.
It goes against my whole, as an Alexander teacher, yeah, it goes completely against correct spinal use.
Yeah. So instead of a leg yield, I might try a half pass without lateral bending, which would be a straight pole, straight horse on a diagonal path of travel. You're not bending in the direction of travel, which would be a half pass, but you're no longer bending against the direction of travel, which would be a leg yield.
Yeah.
And I don't see the purpose of leg yield because it goes against it goes against the definition of correct lateral bending. So I'm going to create incorrect lateral bending.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the idea of moving your horse forward on a diagonal path of travel will work the oblique muscle group.
Yes, it will.
So I'm not opposed to that. But instead of a leg yield, I would just do it without a bend.
Exactly.
And then move from there to half pass, which would be a correct lateral bend in the same direction I'm traveling on a diagonal line.
Yeah.
And lateral work, a lot of people want to go to it early in order to improve their horse faster. And I go, but it's just a two-edged sword, because if you go to it early and you have incorrect lateral bending because you don't understand rotation as a function that's coupled with lateral bending, then the odds are you're going to have incorrect internal lateral bending no matter how many times you try to perfect the maneuver.
Yeah. And that's the humanness of it all, is thinking that the doing is more important than the being.
Yeah. Or the what we do is somehow going to change the how we do.
Exactly.
And I go, no, it doesn't always change the how. We just figure out what to do as best we can, even if it's dysfunctional, as long as we're stable. And
Mhm.
that's what horses do.
Yep. People do it too.
Yeah.
Until something breaks, you know what I mean? Or a pain mechanism is loud enough to suggest change.
Yes. And how do we hear that from our horse? Because people can say out loud, I'm scared, I'm uncomfortable, I
Mm,
don't feel stable, I'm in pain, I need a break, this is too much. So how do horses tell us that?
just what you said. I need a break, so they stop.
Yeah, so through their actions, right? They're speaking to us verbally in a nonverbal language.
In there, and we did that, I don't know how long ago, how many podcasts we're on, but the Umwelt paper was really helpful.
Yeah, on how they perceive through their five senses.
Yeah.
But if we just talk about communication, the communication from our horses is a nonverbal language of body language, energy, forces, and behavior or actions, right? So I go,
Yes.
they're telling us all the time, like you said, your horses that normally really work with you under saddle, you got on two of them and they were just unusually distracted.
Yeah.
So you knew right away something's not right. They're communicating to me that
Yes.
I need to understand something differently. I need to make an adjustment. Something's not working for them.
Yeah. It's that
So,
subtle. It is so subtle. It can be.
and
We don't
sometimes
have
it's
to go
not,
to those extremes.
but sometimes I go, here's how you know that you might be putting your horse in a dysfunctional use. The forces in our aids have to increase. So our
Hmm.
horse feels more resistant, heavy, dull, needs a bigger bit, needs spurs, right? All of those thought processes, that resistance we're getting from our horse is our horse telling us the way you're asking me to do this is not easy for me,
Right.
right? And then the next layer would be either escalating negative behavior, defensiveness. So they become like in flight, maybe more distracted, or they rush, or they can't slow down. And in fight, they might stop a lot, resist the leg aid, pin their ears,
Hmm.
you know, threaten to buck or push back a lot. And those behaviors are, again, they're just telling us this is too difficult for me, what you're
Right
asking.
now.
I can't do it.
Yeah. Right now.
Either find another way to ask the question or change the strategy,
Right.
right? There might be a little piece of the puzzle we're missing for our horse. And if we miss the increased force in resistance, if we miss the behavior signals, right, then either the horses only have two options left. One, increase defensiveness until it's so obvious we can't miss it. They bolt, they spook, they buck, they rear. Can't miss that. That's the
Right.
horse shouting at us, right?
Hmm.
Or they do the best they can. They're working their tail off and they just go lame.
They break down. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I come into a new client, I either have this behavioral issue that can speak to dysfunctional use of the body. And those are horses that tend to have a stronger sense of self-preservation,
Yes. I agree with that.
right? Or the horse that the owner loves, the horse loves the owner. There's a beautiful relationship, but my best horse is having chronic lameness issues,
Hmm.
right? And I go, that's kind of how we know those are the manifestations. If we don't pay attention to the early signs and we just label our horse as stubborn, lazy, excitable, sensitive, it's like we're not addressing the early signals
Right.
that we're maybe not on the right track for our particular horse.
Exactly.
Anything else you want to add? Or we
No,
can,
that was
that was a
great.
lot.
That was a
Yeah,
lot.
that was a lot. So we will wrap it up there. Thank you guys for joining us on the Horse Geeks podcast. If you're on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. And we just passed
Comment.
100 subscribers.
Yay.
Yay. And if you're on the podcast platforms, the YouTube channel is Kirsten Nelsen, all lowercase. And that is in the description box. So you can go either place to get the podcast. And we look forward to seeing you guys next week on another Horse Geeks podcast episode.
Kind
Thanks.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.